all the evidence they're going to be able to obtain from that crime scene.
There has been friction between agencies here on the ground over the sharing of information.
Retired law enforcement officials say something very different, and that 8-minute gap sits right in the middle of this storm. This is not gossip. This is documented surveillance footage showing vehicle movement on a back road leading out of Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood at the exact time investigators believe she was taken from her home.
Nancy Guthrie's neighborhood was quiet that morning, a typical suburban calm that made the events of the day even more jarring. Neighbors would later describe the stillness as eerie, as if the air itself sensed that something was wrong. Nancy, a well-known figure in the community for her volunteer work and approachable demeanor, had been expected to attend a local book club meeting, but she never arrived. Her absence was the first sign that something unusual had occurred. As the hours ticked by, her family grew increasingly anxious. Her daughter called repeatedly, receiving no response. By mid-afternoon, the concern escalated into alarm, prompting the family to contact law enforcement. The responding sheriff noted immediately that Nancy's front door was slightly ajar, a detail that would later fuel intense speculation. Inside, the house appeared largely undisturbed, except for subtle signs that something had been searched or moved. What caught investigators' attention most was a series of faint fingerprints on a set of documents in the living room. These prints didn't match Nancy or anyone else in the immediate household. Suspicion began to hover, quietly at first, over those closest to her. Among them was her son-in-law, a man described by friends as polite but private, who had been visiting the home that morning under the pretext of helping with household repairs. By nightfall, Nancy Guthrie was officially listed as missing. The case immediately drew the attention of local authorities, and soon, whispers spread that key evidence might have been compromised, a detail that would haunt the investigation in the weeks to come. The morning after Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, the sheriff and his team returned to the house for a thorough sweep. Crime scene investigators arrived with cameras, fingerprint kits, and evidence bags, ready to catalog every detail. From the outset, it was clear that this was not a simple missing person case. Small but significant inconsistencies began to emerge. Investigators noted that several drawers in Nancy's study were slightly ajar, some papers scattered as if rifled through. Among the items, a laptop and some personal documents were missing. However, what raised the most eyebrows were subtle smudges and fingerprints on the desk, patterns that didn't belong to Nancy or any known household members. The fingerprints suggested someone had been in a hurry, moving items with care but leaving traces nonetheless. The son-in-law, who had been seen entering and leaving the house shortly before Nancy was reported missing, became an immediate person of interest. When questioned, he claimed he had only come to fix a leaking faucet and help Nancy with household chores. However, the timing of his visit, combined with the apparent disruption of personal items, made investigators uneasy. Surveillance footage from a nearby doorbell camera, though grainy, showed him entering the home at an unusual hour, a detail that would later be pivotal. As forensic teams collected evidence, the sheriff noted that even small details mattered: a broken clasp on a jewelry box, a faint trace of blood on a kitchen counter, and a coffee mug out of place. Each of these seemingly minor clues added weight to the suspicion that someone close to Nancy might have been involved, whether intentionally or unknowingly interfering with the crime scene. The investigation was only beginning, but already the shadow of doubt fell over the son-in-law. By the third day of Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, the investigation had intensified. Local authorities, overwhelmed by the complexities of the case, called in the FBI for assistance. Agents arrived with specialized equipment, including advanced fingerprint analysis tools, portable DNA kits, and digital forensics experts to examine Nancy's electronic devices. The stakes were high. The longer she remained missing, the more urgent the need to follow every lead. Attention quickly turned to the son-in-law. While he had initially cooperated with law enforcement, discrepancies in his account began to surface. For example, He stated he had left the house immediately after performing minor household repairs, but doorbell camera footage and cell phone location data suggested he lingered longer than claimed. Investigators also noted his gloves were missing when he claimed to have handled tools, raising questions about whether he might have touched surfaces that would later become critical evidence. Inside the house, forensic teams meticulously retraced every step. They discovered small smudges of what appeared to be blood near the doorway and faint fingerprints on items that were crucial to understanding Nancy's last movements. Even the smallest inconsistencies, like a chair slightly shifted or a misplaced kitchen utensil, were recorded, photographed, and analyzed. Throughout this process, the son-in-law maintained his innocence, insisting he had no knowledge of Nancy's disappearance. Yet, his proximity to the scene, combined with unexplained actions, cast a long shadow over him. By the end of the day, the FBI's preliminary findings were clear. While there was no direct evidence linking him to a crime, the circumstantial details were enough to warrant continued scrutiny. The case, once thought straightforward, was rapidly becoming a complex web of suspicion.
But far from the end of this case, we are told the Pima County Sheriff's Department, with assistance from the FBI, took that person into custody for questioning south of Tucson. This happened about 90 minutes ago. The mother of Today's Show host, Savannah Guthrie, has been missing now since February 1st. We don't know who this person is or why they were detained, but it does follow the release earlier today of some new photos and video of what appears to be an individual tampering with Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera on the night before she was reported missing. The images show a masked person wearing gloves and a backpack attempting to remove her doorbell camera. The person is holding what appears to be a flashlight in their mouth and what appears to be a gun in their waistband. Late tonight, several FBI agents were seen going door to door near Annie Guthrie's home. That's Nancy's daughter. Earlier tonight, a small amount of money, less than $300, was deposited in the Bitcoin account listed in one of the ransom emails sent to local news station there, though police have not said if they think that note is authentic or if this event tonight has anything to do with that person being detained. At this point, the person has not been charged with anything. We are still, of course, waiting to hear something from the Sheriff's Department or the
timing and unanswered questions. Days into the investigation, the FBI and local law enforcement began uncovering forensic details that would deepen the mystery surrounding Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Analysts focused on the subtle evidence overlooked in the initial sweep: fingerprints on cabinets, faint smears on the living room floor, and the recently noted blood trace in the kitchen. Each piece told a story that, when pieced together, painted a troubling picture. One of the most significant findings involved Nancy's personal laptop. Digital forensics revealed that files had been accessed and then deleted in the hours just before her disappearance. While the son-in-law had claimed he never touched her electronics, investigators could not ignore the timing of these digital traces, which coincided suspiciously with his visit. Furthermore, surveillance footage from the neighborhood suggested he had returned briefly to the property after leaving earlier, a window during which the tampering could have occurred. Investigators also revisited the fingerprints on documents scattered across Nancy's study. Advanced analysis indicated the prints were consistent with a single individual, someone familiar with the household, someone who moved with purpose but tried to avoid leaving a trail. Even minor details, like a slightly ajar cabinet and a displaced kitchen chair, were cataloged meticulously. The FBI emphasized that while these findings did not prove guilt, they were highly irregular. Every detail pointed to interference at the scene, whether intentional or accidental. Meanwhile, the son-in-law continued to insist on his innocence, but the accumulation of circumstantial evidence made it impossible for authorities to dismiss him entirely. As the case deepened, the sheriff realized the investigation was no longer just about locating Nancy. It was about unraveling the tangled web of actions, intentions, and secrets that surrounded her final hours. With mounting forensic evidence and circumstantial leads, law enforcement focused their attention squarely on Nancy Guthrie's son-in-law. The sheriff and FBI agents arranged a formal interview, intending to clarify inconsistencies in his statements and verify his timeline. The atmosphere in the interrogation room was tense, charged with the weight of unspoken suspicion. When questioned, he repeated that he had visited the house only to perform minor repairs and had no involvement in Nancy's disappearance. Yet investigators noticed subtle contradictions. His account of the hours spent at the residence conflicted with neighborhood surveillance and cell phone location data. When asked about the fingerprints found on key documents, he insisted they were accidental or had been there from previous visits, an explanation that did not fully satisfy the agents. The interview also delved into his familiarity with Nancy's routines. He admitted knowing her schedule, which had been consistent for years, but his recollection of her movements on the day in question seemed vague and rehearsed. Agents pressed further, asking about any interactions with the missing woman that morning. While he denied any suspicious behavior, investigators noted micro-expressions and hesitations that could indicate stress or concealment. Throughout the interrogation, the son-in-law remained polite and cooperative, carefully answering each question. But the persistence of discrepancies, combined with the forensic evidence already gathered, made the law enforcement team wary. They concluded that further investigation into his actions, digital devices, and communications was essential. By the end of the session, while no charges were filed, the shadow of suspicion over him had grown heavier. The case was evolving. What had begun as a missing person investigation was now increasingly focused on uncovering the truth about his role, if any, in Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. As the investigation progressed into its second week, the FBI and local law enforcement intensified their forensic review. Specialists re-examined the fingerprints, smudges, and subtle traces at Nancy Guthrie's home, cross-referencing them with the son-in-law's known prints and digital activity. Small but critical discrepancies began to emerge, raising new questions about his involvement. One breakthrough came from digital forensics. Files on Nancy's laptop, previously thought to be deleted at random, revealed a pattern. Sensitive financial and personal documents had been accessed in a deliberate sequence. The timestamps matched periods when the son-in-law had been in the neighborhood according to cell phone pings. Investigators began considering the possibility that the evidence at the scene had been tampered with, not in a violent or overt manner, but subtly enough to obscure Nancy's last movements. Meanwhile, blood traces found near the kitchen counter were tested, confirming they belonged to Nancy. Although minimal, their location suggested a struggle or a sudden incident, not consistent with normal household activity. Combined with the displaced furniture and rifled papers, the pattern hinted at deliberate interference, whether by someone attempting to cover tracks or unknowingly altering the scene. The son-in-law, still publicly cooperative, became a focal point. Agents discovered inconsistencies in his statements, small gaps in his timeline, and unexplained visits to the property. While nothing yet directly implicated him in Nancy's disappearance, the growing accumulation of forensic and circumstantial evidence made him a central figure in the case. The investigation was no longer just about finding Nancy. It was about untangling a web of careful movements, hidden actions, and the possibility that someone very close had altered the truth. By the third week of the investigation, the case had transformed from a simple missing person report into a high-profile inquiry with the son-in-law at the center. The FBI and sheriff's office had compiled extensive evidence, digital footprints, fingerprints, and the forensic traces left in Nancy Guthrie's home, all suggesting that someone close to her may have interfered with the crime scene. Agents focused on the son-in-law's movements during the critical hours. Phone records, security footage, and witness accounts painted a picture that contradicted his earlier statements. There were gaps in his timeline and unexplained returns to the house, each instance intensifying suspicion. The investigators noted that while no direct act of violence had been documented, subtle manipulations, papers moved, minor items relocated, digital files deleted, could have interfered with crucial evidence. The son-in-law maintained his cooperation, meeting with investigators multiple times. Yet even his willingness to answer questions did little to ease concern. In high-stakes investigations, the most meticulous individuals can leave traces that speak louder than their words. Behavioral experts consulted by the FBI observed microexpressions and hesitation in his recounting of events, further deepening doubts about his innocence. Meanwhile, the community watched closely. Rumors began circulating, fueled by social media posts and local news updates, making the atmosphere around the case increasingly tense. For law enforcement, the pressure to find Nancy Guthrie was matched only by the need to determine whether someone close to her had tampered with evidence, potentially complicating the entire investigation.
But hopefully you can't do this job without having that kind of hope. We know that there's the challenges and the potential is there for a bad outcome, but nobody, 400 cops out there, they all have hope and believe that this is a rescue mission.
So that implies you know that she was alive when she left that house?
I believe that. There's nothing to suggest she wasn't.
The case was at a critical juncture. One more piece of evidence could either clear the son-in-law completely or bring him closer to being formally implicated. Weeks of meticulous investigation had brought the Nancy Guthrie case to a critical point. Every piece of evidence, fingerprints, digital activity, displaced items, and the faint traces of blood had been analyzed, cross-checked, and scrutinized. The FBI and local sheriff's office worked tirelessly to untangle the complex web surrounding her disappearance, focusing particularly on the actions of her son-in-law. Despite growing suspicion, the forensic findings did not provide definitive proof that he had caused harm. Instead, the evidence suggested that he may have inadvertently tampered with the crime scene. Investigators noted that subtle movements of items, access to digital files, and inconsistencies in his statements created a pattern of interference that could complicate the case, whether intentional or accidental. Behavioral analyses and microexpression studies hinted at stress and possible concealment, but they could not conclusively establish guilt. Ultimately, the son-in-law remained a person of interest rather than a formally charged suspect. The sheriff emphasized that while circumstantial evidence raised questions, the priority remained locating Nancy Guthrie and understanding the circumstances of her disappearance. Authorities continued to appeal to the public for information, reviewing leads and re-examining every detail from the day she went missing. The case remains open, a testament to the complexity of investigations where those closest to the victim may unwittingly obscure the truth. The son-in-law's involvement, deliberate or accidental, continues to be a focal point, reminding investigators that in cases like Nancy Guthrie, even the smallest actions can have far-reaching consequences. The story still unfolding is a reminder that every clue matters, and the pursuit of truth requires patience, diligence, and unwavering attention to detail.